The acrid bite of smoke clawed at Swan's throat. Flames licked greedily at the ornate wallpaper, devouring the opulent ballroom from the inside out. Crystal chandeliers, once glittering with 1,000 reflected lights, now swayed precariously, casting distorted, flickering shadows across the chaos. Panic, thick and suffocating, choked the air as the city's elite, dressed in their finest, scrambled for the exits. Swan, a catering assistant, hadn't even been meant to be inside the ballroom. She'd been clearing trays from the pre-dinner reception when the first tendrils of smoke snaked out from under a closed door. Instinct had propelled her forward, ignoring the shouts of her supervisor. Now, navigating the pandemonium, she searched for anyone left behind. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Through the smoke, a glint of metal caught her eye. A wheelchair, abandoned near a shattered window, its occupant nowhere in sight. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Someone was still inside. The heat intensified, the roar of the fire growing louder, more menacing. Coughing, her eyes streaming, Swan plunged deeper into the inferno. The smoke swirled around her, a suffocating shroud. Then she saw him, slumped against an overturned table. Partially obscured by falling debris was a man. His face, pale and streaked with soot, was contorted in pain. Adrenaline surged through Swan, obliterating her fear. She reached him, her hands shaking as she tried to assess his injuries. He was conscious but disoriented, his breathing shallow. One leg was trapped beneath the heavy table. "Help," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. My leg. With renewed determination, Swan braced herself against the table. It was heavier than it looked, the ornate wood slick with water from the sprinklers that had finally begun to hiss to life. She strained, every muscle screaming in protest. But the table wouldn't budge. Panic threatened to overwhelm her again. He was too heavy, she couldn't do it. But the man's labored breathing, the fear in his eyes, spurred her on. Taking a deep breath, she pushed with all her might, digging her heels into the plush carpet. The table shifted, groaning in protest, and finally, with a deafening crash, it toppled to one side. Freeing his trapped leg, Swan realized the extent of his injury. His ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle. It was clear he couldn't walk. "We have to get out of here," she choked out, the smoke making it hard to breathe. Ignoring her own exhaustion, she hauled him upright, supporting his weight as best she could. He was surprisingly light, his frame thin beneath the expensive suit. He winced with every movement, but his grip on her arm was surprisingly strong. Together, they stumbled towards the nearest exit, the heat and smoke pressing down on them, making each breath a struggle. The sprinklers had turned the grand ballroom into a watery inferno, the air thick with steam. Finally, they reached the shattered window, a blast of cool night air hitting their faces. Firefighters were already swarming the building, their shouts cutting through the roar of the flames. One of them, seeing their plight, rushed forward, helping Swan guide the injured man to safety. As they were led away from the burning building, wrapped in thick blankets, Swan finally had a chance to look at the man she had rescued. His face, though still pale, was no longer contorted in pain. He looked at her, his eyes, a startling shade of green, fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice still hoarse. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling slightly, and pulled out a ring. It was a simple band of gold, inlaid with a single, exquisite emerald. This was my mother's. "To want you to have it." Swan stared at the ring, speechless. It was far too valuable for her to accept. She tried to refuse, but he pressed it into her hand. "Please," he insisted, his voice weak but firm. "It's a small token of my gratitude." His fingers brushed against hers as he closed her hand around the ring. The contact sent a strange shiver down her spine. She looked up into his eyes, the emerald in the ring catching the flickering light of the fire, and for a fleeting moment, the chaos around them faded away, leaving only the two of them, connected by an unspoken understanding. She didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him, but in that moment, looking into his eyes, she felt a connection, a flicker of something profound that transcended the terror of the fire. She swallowed, her throat tight. "You're welcome," she whispered, clutching the ring tightly in her hand. He offered a faint smile, and then exhaustion claimed him. He closed his eyes, his head falling against her shoulder. Swan held him close, the weight of his body against hers a tangible reminder of the life she had saved. The fire raged on behind them, casting long, dancing shadows. But in the midst of the destruction, a fragile seed of something new had been sown. The sterile white walls of the hospital room pressed in on Swan, the antiseptic smell a stark contrast to the lingering scent of smoke that clung to her clothes, a phantom reminder of the fire that had ravaged her life, and, inexplicably, intertwined it with the man before her. Nate, his legs still encased in a cast, sat propped up in bed, his gaze fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. The gentle, almost apologetic man she'd met years ago seemed to have vanished, replaced by a chillingly pragmatic stranger. "It was all a charade, Swan," he began, his voice low, each word meticulously chosen. "The limp, the cane, the vulnerability, all an elaborate performance." Swan's breath hitched, a cold dread spreading through her. What are you talking about?" He gave a mirthless chuckle. "My dear, naive Swan, you saw what you wanted to see, a broken man in need of saving. The truth is, I was orchestrating a takeover, a hostile acquisition of my uncle's company. Feigning weakness was my greatest weapon. It allowed me to observe, to plan, to strike when they least expected it." The room seemed to spin. The kind, wounded man she had carried through smoke and flames, the man who had looked at her with such gratitude, had been wearing a mask of helplessness that had completely fooled her. "But why?" she whispered, feeling a profound sense of betrayal. "Why deceive everyone? Sentimentality is a luxury I cannot afford." Nate replied, his voice hardening. "My uncle, bless his heart, was too trusting, too blinded by familial loyalty. He was ripe for the picking. And I, Swan, am not one to let an opportunity pass me by." He recounted the intricate details of his deception, how he had manipulated market trends, planted false information, and exploited his uncle's weaknesses. Each word was a blow, chipping away at the pedestal she had placed him on, revealing the cold, calculating businessman beneath. The gentle touch she remembered, a grateful look in his eyes, now felt like carefully crafted illusions, designed to elicit her sympathy, her trust. Swan's mind raced, trying to reconcile the man before her with the image she had cherished for years. The image of a man who needed her, who had seen her kindness when no one else had. Now, she realized, she had been a pawn in his game, a silent witness to his elaborate performance. She stumbled back, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the cold, impersonal wall. The antiseptic smell was suffocating, and she managed to ask the name of her fiancé, Nish's nephew, catching in her throat. Did you use him too?" Nish's expression softened slightly, a flicker of something akin to regret crossing his face. Lair was collateral damage, a necessary sacrifice. Swan felt a wave of nausea. She thought of Lair, his gentle nature, his unwavering belief in family. Had he known? Had he suspected the truth about his uncle? A sudden knock on the door interrupted the tense silence. A nurse entered, holding a small, delicately wrapped package. "This arrived for Mr. Nicolo," she said. placing it on the bedside table. Nietzsche dismissed the nurse with a curt nod, his gaze returning to Swan, a strange glint in his eyes. Speaking of Leia, he began, picking up the package and slowly unwrapping it. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a wedding invitation. Elegant script announced the impending nuptials of Leia and another woman. The blood drained from Swan's face. He's getting married, she stammered, the invitation slipping from her numb fingers. Nietzsche watched her, his expression unreadable. It seems so, he said, his voice a low murmur. He's moved on. Swan found happiness elsewhere. The world tilted on its axis. The humiliation of being discarded, of being replaced, washed over her. First, the fire had taken everything from her. Then, Nietzsche, the man she thought was her savior, had revealed himself to be a masterful manipulator. And now, Leia, the man she had promised to spend her life with, had abandoned her without a word, without an explanation. She wanted to scream, to rage, to lash out at the cruel injustice of it all. But all she could do was stand there, frozen in place, the sterile white walls closing in, the antiseptic smell choking her, a weight of Nish's revelation and Leia's betrayal crushing her spirit, the carefully constructed world she had built around herself, the hope of a future with Leia, the lingering gratitude for Nietzsche, crumbled into dust, leaving her standing amidst the ruins, utterly alone. The fire, she realized, had not only taken her home, it had burned away every illusion, every comfort, every last shred of hope she had clung to, and in its place, it had left a chilling truth. She had been a fool, blinded by her own naivete, a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. The opulent ballroom shimmered, a carousel of champagne flutes and silk gowns. Swan, radiant in her ivory wedding dress, felt a tremor of unease beneath the veneer of bridal bliss. Her fiancé, Lucas, charming and handsome, whispered sweet nothings in her ear, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. The orchestra struck up a celebratory waltz and Lucas led her onto the dance floor, their movements a practiced elegance. But Swan's eyes were drawn to the entrance, a figure silhouetted against the warm glow of the hallway. A figure she knew, a figure she had tried to forget, Nietzsche. He sat in a sleek, motorized wheelchair, his presence radiating an unsettling calm amidst the festive chaos. His face, etched with a familiar sadness, held her gaze across the crowded room. The years melted away, the opulent ballroom dissolving into the smoky haze of that fateful night. The fire, the fear, his gentle hands on her face. Swan, Lucas murmured, his breath warm against her ear. You seem distracted. She forced a smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. Just overwhelmed, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The waltz continued, a dizzying whirl of music and motion. But Swan felt anchored to that single point across the room. Nietzsche hadn't moved. His eyes, dark and intense, bore into hers, a silent conversation across the years. The memory resurfaced with the force of a tidal wave. The crumbling orphanage, the panicked cries, the choking smoke. Then, his voice, calm and reassuring amidst the terror, guiding her through the inferno. He had been her rescuer, her solace in the heart of the storm. But then, he had vanished, leaving only a lingering scent of sandalwood and a void in her heart. Now, here he was, a ghost from her past, a silent observer at her wedding to his nephew. The irony was a cruel twist of fate, a sharp pang of regret in the midst of her supposed happiness. Swan, Lucas's voice held a note of concern. He stopped dancing, pulling her gently away from the swirling crowd. What's wrong? You're pale. She shook her head, trying to dispel the image of Nish's steady gaze. It's nothing, she lied, forcing a smile. Just the emotion of it all. But it was everything. It was the weight of the unspoken, the burden of a past she had tried to bury. It was the sudden, shocking realization that she had been living a lie, a carefully constructed fairy tale that was crumbling around her. Lucas, oblivious to the internal turmoil raging within her, led her towards a table laden with champagne flutes. He lifted a glass, his eyes sparkling with adoration. "To us," he toasted, his voice filled with genuine affection. Swan raised her glass, the crystal cold against her trembling fingers. "To us," she echoed, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Her gaze drifted back to Nietzsche. He remained seated, a solitary figure amidst the celebration, his expression unreadable. He raised his own glass, a silent acknowledgement, a silent toast to a future that would never be. Suddenly, the room felt suffocating, the music a discordant symphony of her own confusion. She excused herself, murmuring something about needing fresh air, and fled the ballroom, the weight of her past pressing down on her like a physical burden. She stumbled onto a balcony overlooking the city, the cool night air a welcome reprieve from the stifling atmosphere inside. The twinkling lights of the cityscape stretched before her, a glittering tapestry of hopes and dreams. But Swan's own dreams felt fractured, shattered by the unexpected reappearance of the man who had once held her hand in the darkness. "You shouldn't be out here alone," a voice said softly behind her. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Nietzsche, he had followed her. He maneuvered his wheelchair closer, the faint whir of the motor the only sound in the stillness of the night. "You look troubled," he said, his voice gentle, laced with concern. "Troubled," she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "That's an understatement." He regarded her silently for a moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "I understand," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I know why you're here." Swan stared at him, her mind reeling. You know." He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I've known for a while, but how?" He reached out, his hand hovering just above hers. "Let's just say I have connections." His touch, even though it didn't quite reach her, sent a shiver down her spine. The years melted away, the intervening time a mere illusion. She was back in the burning orphanage, his hand the lifeline in the darkness. "Lucas, he doesn't know," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "He doesn't know about us." Nish's smile faded. "No," he said softly, "he doesn't." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of a shared past and an uncertain future. The distant strains of music drifted from the ballroom, a mocking reminder of the life she was about to leave behind. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Nish's gaze drifted towards the city lights, his expression unreadable. "It's a long story," he said quietly. "A story I'll tell you if you'll give me the chance." The opulent ballroom shimmered, a kaleidoscope of crystal chandeliers and satin-draped tables. Swan, radiant in her ivory gown, stood frozen, a statue carved from ice. The video, projected onto a massive screen meant for wedding memories, played on, a cruel mockery of her happiness. It wasn't the grainy footage of Lucas and her stepsister, Emmy, tangled in a passionate embrace that shocked her the most. It was the casual cruelty in their whispered words, the dismissive laughter that followed each mention of her name. May's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the stunned silence. "She's so naive, Lucas. Thinks she'd actually marry a nobody like her." Swan felt the cold hand grip her heart, squeezing the joy, the hope, the love, out of it like water from a sponge. Just moments ago, she had been standing at the altar, gazing into Lucas's eyes, believing in a future painted with promises. Now, those promises crumbled around her, a fragment sharp and stinging. The room, filled with the city's elite, buzzed with horrified whispers. Her humiliation was a public spectacle, a grand performance orchestrated by the two people she had trusted most. Lucas, his face ashen, stumbled towards her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Swan, it's not what it looks like. The words, hollow and pathetic, bounced off the walls of her despair. She looked at him, really looked at him, stripping away the veneer of charm and charisma that had captivated her. Beneath it, she saw a coward, a man who used affection like a weapon, wielding it to manipulate and deceive. "Isn't it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, yet amplified by the sudden hush that had fallen over the room. She felt a strange detachment, as if watching the scene unfold from a distance. He reached for her hand, but she recoiled, stepping back as if his touch were poison. "Please, Swan, let me explain." "Explain what?" she asked, her voice gaining strength, fueled by the rising tide of anger. "Explain how you spent months weaving a web of lies, pretending to love me while you were with her." She gestured towards the screen, where May's triumphant smirk seemed to grow wider with each passing second. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the muffled sobs of Swan's well-meaning but clueless stepmother. Swan felt the hand on her shoulder, a warm, steady presence in the swirling chaos. She turned to see Nich, Lucas's uncle, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. He leaned closer, his voice low and soothing. "Swan," he said, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that surprised her. "I know this is painful, but you're stronger than you think. Don't let them see you break." His words, spoken with such quiet authority, were a lifeline in a sea of despair. Swan took a deep breath, straightening her spine, lifting her chin. The tears that threatened to spill remained stubbornly locked behind a wall of pride. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Lucas, emboldened by Nish's intervention, stepped forward again. "Swan, please, this was a mistake. I love you." The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Swan looked at him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and contempt. "Love," she repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. "You think this is love? This betrayal? This humiliation?" She turned to Nich, her voice trembling slightly. "He doesn't love me. He never did." Nish's gaze remained steady, unwavering. He reached out, not to touch her, but to offer her his arm. "Then let us show him what real love looks like," he said, his voice resonating with a power that sent a shiver down her spine. Confusion warred with a flicker of hope in Swan's heart. What did he mean? What was he suggesting? She glanced at Lucas, his face a mask of bewilderment. MEI, on the screen, now looked less triumphant, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Swan took Nish's arm, a sudden surge of defiance coursing through her veins. She didn't understand what he was planning, but in that moment, she trusted him. She trusted the strength she saw in his eyes, the quiet power that radiated from him. As she walked away from Lucas, away from the wreckage of her dreams, she felt a strange sense of liberation. The humiliation remained, a raw wound, but beneath it, something new was stirring, a seed of resilience, a promise of a different kind of future, one that she couldn't yet define, but one that she was suddenly, fiercely, determined to claim. Nich led her to the altar, the very spot where she had stood moments ago, believing in a lie. He turned to face the stunned crowd, his voice ringing out, clear and strong. "I, Nicholson Vanderkilt, take you, Swan Lee, to be my wife." The gasp that rippled through the room was like a wave crashing against the shore. Swan stared at him, a mind reeling. Nicholson Vanderkilt, the elusive billionaire, the reclusive philanthropist, the man whose face had been hidden from the public for years, the man she had met. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. The fire, the kindness, the shared pain. It was him. It had always been him. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love she had never known existed, a love that had been waiting for her, patiently, through the years, through the lies, through the pain. And in that moment, surrounded by the ashes of her broken dreams, Swan knew that she had found her true prince, not in the glittering facade of a charming liar, but in the quiet strength of a man who had always seen her, truly seen her, for who she was. "I do," she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound strength, a strength born from the ashes of betrayal. And as they exchanged vows, under the watchful eyes of a stunned and silent crowd, Swan knew that her story, their story, was just beginning. The opulent ballroom, once a swirling vortex of confusion and betrayal, stilled. The remnants of the wedding decorations, now slightly askew, seemed to hold their breath, reflecting the stunned faces of the guests. Crystal chandeliers glittered, casting a kaleidoscopic light on the scene below. Champagne flutes, abandoned mid-toast, stood like silent witnesses on linen-covered tables. Lucas, frozen mid-stride towards the exit, looked back, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Victoria, her carefully constructed mask of composure crumbling, clutched a crumpled napkin, her knuckles white. And at the center of it all, Swan, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers, stood radiant, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. She'd been adrift in a sea of lies, manipulated, humiliated. The revelation of Nish's true identity, the realization that the man she'd cared for years ago, the man whose kindness had touched her soul, was the same man she'd unknowingly fallen in love with again, had shattered the carefully constructed facade of her world. But from the wreckage of that deception, a fierce resolve had bloomed. "Nish," she addressed him, her voice clear and unwavering, a stark contrast to the tremor that ran through her. Every eye in the room was fixed on them, the silence amplifying the weight of her words. She took a hesitant step closer, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I know now. I know who you are. I know what you've done, why you've done it." And as she paused, drawing a deep breath, the air catching in her throat, "I understand." Her gaze met his. His face, usually impassive, betrayed a flicker of surprise, a hint of vulnerability she'd rarely seen. It emboldened her. She remembered the fire, the fear, the gentle touch of his hand, the quiet strength in his eyes. The memory resonated with the feelings she had now, a deep, unwavering connection that transcended the hurt and confusion of recent events. He hadn't manipulated her for cruel amusement. He'd orchestrated this elaborate charade to protect her, to guide her back to him. A strange, bittersweet sense of gratitude washed over her. "I know that beneath all of the performance," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, "there's a man I care for deeply, a man who saved me once, a man who, in his own way, has saved me again." Swan took another step, closing the distance between them until she was standing directly before him, her hand outstretched. The diamond ring Lucas had placed on her finger, now a symbol of betrayal and deceit, felt heavy, a foreign object on her skin. She slipped it off, the cool metal a stark reminder of the life she was leaving behind. The hush in the room deepened, punctuated only by the soft clink of the ring as she placed it on a nearby table. It was a symbolic gesture, a severing of ties, a public declaration of her choice. "Nish," she said, her voice filled with emotion, her eyes shining with unshaded tears. "I choose you. I choose the man who saw me, truly saw me, when no one else did. The man who showed me kindness when I was at my most vulnerable. The man I fell in love with. Not once, but twice." She knelt before him, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was her truth. This was her choice. "Nish," she repeated, her voice trembling but resolute, "will you marry me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every guest, every waiter, every musician held their breath, captivated by the unfolding drama. Lucas, pale and shaken, remained rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on Swan. Victoria, her face a mask of fury and disbelief, looked as though she might shatter into a million pieces. Nietzsche, his eyes locked on Swan's, remained motionless for a beat, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features, softening the hard lines, revealing the warmth and tenderness she knew resided within him. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he took hers, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her. "Swan," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "there is nothing I would want more." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The tension, held taut for so long, finally broke, replaced by a wave of murmurs and whispers. Some guests wept openly, moved by the raw emotion of the scene. Others exchanged bewildered glances, struggling to comprehend the sudden shift in events. He gently pulled her to her feet, his hand lingering on hers. "You have no idea," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion, "how long I've waited to hear those words." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love so profound, so intense, that it stole her breath away. "You have no idea how much I love you." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers, a soft, tender kiss that spoke volumes. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of a wedding that was never meant to be, Swan knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be, in the arms of the man she loved, finally free from the shackles of deception, finally ready to embrace her future. The future she had chosen, a future with Nietzsche. The weight of the world lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a lightness, a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The turnaround had arrived, not in the way she had expected, but in a way that was infinitely more profound, infinitely more real. The grand ballroom of the Chateau de l'Etoile shimmered, the aftermath of the aborted wedding hanging heavy in the air like the lingering scent of champagne and regret. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows across the polished marble floor, reflecting the turmoil in Swan's heart. She stood at the foot of the grand staircase, her simple white dress a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. A lone figure against the backdrop of whispering guests and bewildered staff. Her gaze, sharp and unwavering, was fixed on Lear and his family huddled together like a flock of startled birds. Her silence, more potent than any outburst, commanded the room. Lear's face, usually so assured, was now a mask of panic confusion. His mother, resplendent in a peacock blue gown, clutched her pearls, her lips moving in silent prayer. His father, a stoic man with iron grey hair, stared at Swan with a mixture of disbelief and nascent anger. The whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves in a rising wind, grew louder, fueling the tension that crackled in the air. "Lear," Swan finally spoke, her voice surprisingly steady, each word a carefully aimed arrow. "You knew." Lear flinched, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Swan, I can explain." His voice was weak, devoid of its usual charm. "Explain what?" Swan's voice rose, gaining strength with each syllable. "Explain how you could string me along for months, knowing all along who Nietzsche truly was, knowing that he was the man I'd been searching for all these years." The name Nietzsche hung in the air, a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a palpable current of shock rippling through the assembled guests. Lear's parents exchanged a look of horrified understanding, the color draining from their faces. Swan took a step forward, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and righteous anger. "You played me. All of you. You used me like a pawn in some twisted game of inheritance and power." Before Lear could stammer out a reply, a voice, strong and resonant, cut through the tense silence. "That's enough, Lear." All heads turned towards the source of the voice. Nietzsche, seated in his wheelchair at the top of the grand staircase, commanded attention. He had shed his usual unassuming attire, and was now dressed in a tailored suit, the dark fabric accentuating his broad shoulders and powerful presence. The subtle glow of the chandeliers illuminated his face, revealing the strength and determination in his eyes. He gestured with a hand, and two attendants swiftly wheeled him down the staircase. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft whirring of the wheelchair's wheels. As Nietzsche reached the bottom of the stairs, he turned to face the crowd. "My name," he announced, his voice carrying across the vast ballroom, "is Nicholas van der Linde, and, as some of you may now realize, I'm the sole owner and CEO of Van der Linde Industries." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The whispers escalated into a cacophony of murmurs as the realization of Nish's true identity dawned upon the guests. Leia's parents looked ashen, their carefully constructed facade of composure crumbling. Swan stared at Nish, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within her. Shock, disbelief, and a surge of something akin to triumph warred within her heart. It was him, the kind stranger from all those years ago. The man who had offered her comfort and hope amidst the ashes of her old life. The man she had unknowingly fallen in love with again. Nish's gaze met Swan's, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Swan," he said, his voice laced with tenderness, "I never forgot you, the girl with the fiery spirit and the kindest heart." He turned to address the stunned crowd. "The charade is over." Leia and his family concocted this elaborate scheme to secure their position within the company. They believed that by marrying Swan, Leia would gain control of a significant portion of my assets. Leia, his face contorted with a mixture of shame and anger, opened his mouth to protest, but Nietzsche silenced him with a raised hand. "Don't insult everyone's intelligence, Leia," Nietzsche said, his voice cold and sharp. "Your greed and deceit are evident to all." He then turned back to Swan, his eyes filled with warmth. "Swan, you are the only person I want by my side. You are the woman I love." Tears welled up in Swan's eyes, a mixture of relief, joy, and overwhelming love. She had found him again, and this time, there would be no secrets, no lies, no betrayals. Nietzsche reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. He then turned to the officiating priest, who still stood bewildered amidst the unfolding drama. "We're ready now," Nietzsche said, his voice firm and resolute. "The ceremony can continue." A collective sigh of astonishment rippled through the crowd. The priest, recovering his composure, cleared his throat and began to speak. As Swan stood beside Nietzsche, her hand clasped in his, she looked out at the stunned faces in the crowd. She saw Leia and his family, their faces masks of defeat and humiliation. She saw the bewildered guests, their eyes wide with disbelief, and then she saw the faces of the few true friends she had made, their eyes shining with happiness for her. And in that moment, amidst the grandeur of the ballroom and the drama that had unfolded, Swan knew she had found her happy ending. She had found her prince. Not in the guise of a charming deceiver, but in the man who had always been there, hidden in plain sight, the man who had loved her not for her perceived worth, but for the person she truly was. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Swan leaned in and kissed Nietzsche, a kiss that sealed not just their marriage vows, but a love story that had begun years ago amidst the ashes of a fire, and had finally found its perfect, incandescent flame. The cathedral's stained glass windows, fractured rainbows of light, cast an ethereal glow on Swan's face. Gone was the bewildered bride, replaced by a woman radiating a quiet strength. She sat across from Nietzsche in the vestry, the scent of incense and old wood clinging to the air. The opulent room, meant for hushed prayers and solemn pronouncements, now held the buzzing energy of a life redirected. Nish's wheelchair, usually a symbol of his confinement, seemed almost insignificant now, dwarfed by the magnitude of the moment. He reached for her hand, his fingers tracing the delicate gold band on her finger. His ring. I still can't believe it, Swan whispered, her voice husky with emotion. The whirlwind of the past few hours had barely registered the dramatic revelation of Lucas's betrayal, his orchestrated scheme to seize Nish's fortune, the subsequent arrest, the shocked gasps of the guests, and finally, Nish's quiet ascension, discarding the facade of frailty, taking command. It felt like a dream, a bizarre, beautiful dream. Nish chuckled, a rich, deep sound that sent a ripple of warmth through her. Believe it, Mrs. Morrow. You're looking at the real head of the Morrow Empire. Swan smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. And I'm looking at the man who saved me from that fire all those years ago. His gaze softened. You remembered. How could I forget? You were my hero. Even if I didn't know your name until today, the memory of the intense heat, the choking smoke, and then the strong arms pulling her to safety flooded back. The small, carved wooden bird he'd given her then, the charm she'd cherished unknowingly for years, now felt heavy with significance. I never forgot you either, Swan. Your face, it haunted me. He paused, the ghost of a painful memory flickering in his eyes. I lost you in the chaos. The doctors told me a young girl had been rescued, but they couldn't identify you. I searched, but fate, perhaps, Swan suggested, her voice laced with wonder, brought us back together. He nodded, squeezing her hand. Indeed. And this time, I won't let you go. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken promises and the weight of their shared history. Swan looked at Nish, truly saw him for the first time, stripped bare of pretense. The sharp intelligence in his eyes, the strength in his jaw, the kindness that radiated from his core. She had been drawn to Lucas's charm, his superficial allure. With Nish, it was something deeper, a connection forged in fire and tempered by time. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now, he said, his voice firm, we rebuild. We expose the truth about Lucas and his cohorts, and we ensure justice is served. And, he added, his voice softening, we start our life together, properly, this time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a delicate necklace. A silver chain with a pendant shaped like a tiny, intricately carved bird, identical to the one he'd given her as a child. This is, Swan stammered, tears welling in her eyes. A reminder, Nish said, his voice thick with emotion, of where we began, and a symbol of where we're going. He fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. As their eyes met, a silent understanding passed between them, a promise of a future built on truth, resilience, and a love that had defied the odds. A knock on the door broke the spell. It was Detective Miller, the lead investigator on the fire case, his face grim. Mr. Morrow, we have a breakthrough. We found evidence linking the arson to. He hesitated, his eyes flicking to Swan. Nish nodded. You can speak freely. The evidence points to Lucas's father, Charles, and his business partner, Victor Martel. Apparently, they wanted to force your father out of the company and saw the fire as an opportunity. They never intended for anyone to get hurt. But Swan gasped, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Lucas's greed, his desperation to secure his inheritance. It was all a twisted echo of his father's ambition. The fire that had brought her and Nish together was also the source of so much pain. Nish's face hardened, but there was no surprise in his eyes. I suspected as much. Thank you, Detective. Make sure they face the full consequences of their actions. The detective nodded and left, closing the door behind him. The silence returned, heavier this time, tinged with the bittersweet taste of justice. Swan looked at Nitch, her heart aching for the pain he must have carried all these years. You knew, didn't you? You knew about your father, Nitch sighed, running a hand through his hair. I had my suspicions, but without concrete proof, I couldn't act. I dedicated my life to building the company, to honoring my father's legacy, even though a part of me always questioned the circumstances of his death. Now, finally, the truth is out. He turned to Swan, his eyes filled with a warmth that melted the ice around her heart. But that's the past, Swan. Our future starts now. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Come, he said, a gentle smile playing on his lips. Let's leave this place and begin our new life together. As they left the vestry, hand in hand, the stained glass windows cast long, vibrant shadows behind them, a testament to the darkness they had overcome and the bright future that lay ahead. The cathedral bells began to peal, a joyful symphony echoing through the ancient stone, a celebration of love, resilience, and the enduring power of fate. They stepped out into the sunlight, a new chapter unfolding, bathed in the golden glow of a second chance.